Okay, so when you think of space, what immediately springs to mind? For me, yeah, it's astronauts, floating around, these huge rockets, incredible tech. But also, for so many of us, it's that orange drink fix. You know the one I mean, Tang. It just screams outer space, doesn't it?
It really does. That powdered, fruity thing is just locked in our heads with space travel.
Exactly. And I think most of us grew up with this idea, right? That Tang was basically cooked up by NASA, for the
That's
astronauts.
the common story, definitely.
But what if that thing we all kind of accept, what if it's actually, well, maybe a little less cosmic than we think? So that's our mission for this deep dive. Peel back the layers on this really sticky myth. We want to uncover the actual truth behind Tang in space and maybe see what it tells us about innovation, marketing, and just how we perceive things.
Yeah?
So yeah, get ready. We're diving into a bit of cultural history that's frankly more than just beverage trivia. It's about how stories, take hold.
It's quite fascinating, really. What's truly compelling here is how a simple link, a simple association, can totally redefine how we see a product, how it gets its legacy. It's just a prime example of how these narratives, once they get going, they can really outrun the facts. The simple story, it turns out, often isn't the whole story.
Okay, so let's unpack that common belief then. The story most of us heard, the one that just feels right. NASA invented Tang.
Right.
It brings up these images, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like scientists in lab coats figuring out astronaut food for zero G, and bam, they create this easy, shelf-stable, vitamin-packed drink just for space.
That's a very compelling picture.
Yeah, it fits so neatly into that whole space race narrative. NASA, this powerhouse of innovation, just gifting us these everyday wonders.
Precisely. And that narrative, it's kind of romantic, isn't it? And patriotic, too. It just slots Tang right in there alongside other things people think came from space, like Velcro or Teflon.
Right, those usual suspects.
Yeah. And it's worth saying, Velcro and Teflon were connected to space stuff in interesting ways, adapted or used. But Tang's story is actually quite different. But the myth sticks. It sticks because it fits perfectly with that bigger idea, human genius, reaching for the stars, all that. It feels comfortable. It makes sense. For a long time, it just felt right. And here's where it gets really interesting. The truth. It takes a sharp turn from that popular story.
Okay.
Tang was not invented by NASA. It wasn't developed for space missions at all. Actually, it existed quite a while before any astronaut ever sipped it up there.
Wait, what?
Tang was developed by General Foods back in 1957.
It's 1957, seriously. That's way before the Gemini missions. That's 5 years before John Glenn even orbited the Earth.
Exactly. 5 full years before.
So if it wasn't NASA, who did invent it and why? This is definitely not the story I thought I knew.
Well, the person behind it was a food chemist, a pretty brilliant one, actually, named William A. Mitchell.
William A. Mitchell.
Okay. And here's another little mind-bending fact for you. Mitchell also invented some other really iconic processed foods.
Yeah.
Things you definitely know.
Like what?
Pop Rocks.
And Cool Whip.
Hold on. Stop. The same guy invented Tang and Pop Rocks and Cool Whip.
The very same William A. Mitchell.
It's wild. That's not just a plot twist. That's like a whole processed food universe from one person.
Wow.
Okay. So if Tang wasn't for space, what was the original plan back in 57? What was its, Earth mission?
It was much more down to earth, honestly, pretty mundane. Tang was just designed as a fruit-flavored drink mix, with vitamins added that dissolved easily in water.
What?
The idea was just convenience, a way to add flavor and maybe some nutrients to plain old tap water, especially for families who maybe didn't always have fresh juice handy or maybe didn't have great refrigeration.
Makes sense.
It hit the market, the grocery stores, in 1959. And honestly, initial sales were, they were pretty underwhelming.
Really? It didn't fly off the shelves?
Not at all. It was just another new product kind of struggling to find its audience. That's amazing to think about. Tang, just sitting there quietly for a few years. So what changed? What catapulted it from, pantry filler to space icon? How did that happen? That's the real question, isn't it?
And that is exactly where NASA comes into the story. But, crucially, not as the inventor. Tang's fame absolutely exploded. Yeah, but not because of some genius recipe tweak or a sudden consumer craving. It was almost accidental.
Accidental? How?
Well, in the early 60s, NASA was looking for stuff for the astronauts to eat and drink on the Gemini missions. Gemini, that was the program right after Mercury, sort of paving the way for Apollo.
Got it.
And they chose Tang, not because it was some breakthrough space food technology, but for really practical, almost simple reasons.
Like what?
It was super convenient, right? Just add water. And maybe the biggest thing for the astronauts, it helped cover up the kind of unpleasant metallic taste of the water from the spacecraft's life support systems.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I can imagine wanting something to make the recycled water taste better up there.
Exactly. Plus, it was already out there, commercially available. NASA didn't have to spend time or money developing something new from scratch. They could just buy it off the shelf, basically.
So it was just handy and helped with the water taste. And this, I guess, is where the myth really takes off, when people actually saw astronauts with it.
That was the turning point.
Yeah.
Absolutely. When astronauts, yeah, including the big names like John Glenn, were seen on TV, in photos, drinking Tang in space,
Yeah.
the media just latched onto it.
Oh, I bet.
It was such a powerful visual. These heroes up in orbit drinking this bright orange stuff.
And General Foos must have noticed.
Oh, they noticed. They seized that opportunity with, well, pretty brilliant marketing instincts. They started weaving the space connection into their ads almost right away.
Did they say NASA invented it?
Not explicitly, no.
Yeah.
They were careful about that. They didn't outright lie and say NASA invented Tang, but they definitely didn't go out of their way to correct the misconception either.
A sin of omission, maybe.
You could say that.
Yeah.
They just sort of let people connect the dots themselves.
Yeah.
And those dots formed this incredibly appealing picture. Tang equals space travel.
And boom, just like that, the whole story around Tang shifts.
Yeah.
It goes from this kind of forgotten drink mix to the astronaut drink, the taste of adventure, the future, all that.
That's it. That powerful, almost viral association gave birth to the myth that so many of us grew up with. It really shows you the power of an image, doesn't it?
It really does.
And what's amazing is how stubbornly that myth has held on for, like, decades now. There are a few reasons why it stuck so well.
Okay.
First, you just can't deny the strong visual association. Those iconic images, that footage of astronauts with the Tang pouch.
Yeah.
It's burned into our collective memory.
Yeah, you can picture it right now.
Second, the marketing momentum was huge. General Foods kept leaning into that space age angle in their ads for years, constantly reinforcing the link, even subtly. Then there's just the cultural simplicity of it all. The idea of this fun, bright orange powder coming from super advanced space tech. It just fit perfectly with this bigger, really appealing story about NASA being this engine of innovation for everyday life. It was neat, satisfying.
It made sense in that context.
Exactly. And finally, maybe the most critical factor, a real lack of clarification. Neither NASA nor General Foods, which is now part of Kraft Heinz, ever really pushed back hard against the myth.
Why would they, I guess?
Well, that raises the question, right? Why correct a really good story if it's boosting your brand recognition, probably helping sales, and didn't cost you anything in R&D?
That's a pretty cynical take, but probably realistic from a business perspective.
Wow.
It makes you think about how easily we just absorb these stories, especially if they fit a narrative we like.
Right. We often want to believe the more exciting version.
Yeah. And it shows how perception can sometimes become more powerful than the actual facts, especially when there's a benefit to letting that perception ride.
And that's the really fascinating takeaway here. Beyond just, Tang trivia, it's a powerful lesson.
Yeah.
It shows how corporate marketing, media coverage, the public's imagination, how they can all kind of blur the lines between fact and fiction. It's also a good reminder, isn't it, that not everything we link with space travel was actually invented for it. Some things, like Tang or even Velcro or good old duct tape, they existed before. They were just adapted because they worked for a specific need in space.
Right. They were useful tools they already had.
Exactly. Whereas other things did come directly out of NASA R&D, things like memory foam or those infrared ear thermometers. There's a difference.
It really highlights why it's important to give credit where it's due, right? To
Yeah.
understand where innovation actually comes from. Sometimes it is a government lab, sometimes it's a food company, sometimes it's just smart marketing grabbing an opportunity. So let's just quickly sum up our deep dive today. Tang, not from a NASA lab, not designed for astronauts originally, didn't fuel the Mercury missions or anything.
Nope.
It came from William A. Mitchell, a food scientist at General Foods back in the 1950s. A long time before astronauts needed special drinks. NASA did use it, and that use absolutely made Tang famous, turned it into an icon. But they didn't invent it.
That's the core of it.
And, correcting this kind of myth, it's not about trying to knock the space program. NASA's achievements are incredible on their own. They don't need Tang's invention story added to the list.
Absolutely not.
It's more about understanding the real story, right? How things actually happen, how innovation works, and how culture and marketing shape what we remember.
And Tang's image, as the taste of space, it still endures. And maybe that's its own kind of legacy. in a way.
That's an interesting thought.
It's just this powerful reminder of how storytelling and branding and these big, bold frontiers like space, how they can really shape our collective memory of innovation. Even when the actual facts tell a, well, slightly different story, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it, what other facts you think you know might have a hidden history tucked away behind them.
That is a great question to end on. Keep digging, keep questioning those stories, and join us next time for another deep dive.